Welcome to Electrified. It's your host, Dylan Loomis. So here it is today from the Financial Times and Reuters. SpaceX has told investors it plans to launch a Starlink mobile service for U.S. consumers. This in a move that would allow SpaceX to compete directly with Verizon, AT&T, and yes, T-Mobile, the company that SpaceX currently has a partnership with for direct-to-cell. That partnership with T-Mobile provides supplemental coverage from space to extend internet access to remote areas. But now, SpaceX is considering launching a Starlink retail product and could build its own terrestrial U.S. mobile network. This apparently coming from SpaceX President Gwynne Shotwell, as she told investors during the roadshow. And remember, we actually talked about this months ago. SpaceX did buy wireless spectrum licenses from EchoStar for Starlink for about $17 billion, and then again for $2.6 billion a few months later, giving it the ability to quickly create a strong and affordable direct-to-cell service by using EchoStar's wireless airwaves. So right now, SpaceX already has these V2 mini satellites that have been launching on Falcon 9. But to date, they've been primarily for broadband internet access, mainly for the overall Starlink internet system. But as part of this current V2 mini satellite series, they do have some dedicated satellites for direct-to-cell to communicate directly with cell phones that are unmodified, meaning they don't need any extra hardware. It works as is now. And each one of those satellites has a dedicated phase array antenna for those cellular communications. And that technology is powering the current partnership between SpaceX and T-Mobile, what they call T-Satellite. And as far as we know, this direct-to-cell partnership between T-Mobile and Starlink is not yet using those EchoStar frequencies. SpaceX has already been approved to buy those spectrums, but they're being reserved for the next gen of direct-to-cell satellites. And this is all directly in the S1. You'll see it right here. V2 mobile satellites refers to the next gen mobile satellites, which are designed to provide more comprehensive satellite to mobile services, including broadband data and IoT connectivity, which we expect to begin deploying on Starship in 2027. And the V3 satellites are the next gen Starlink broadband satellites, which are designed to offer 1 terabit per second of downlink capacity per satellite. And they expect to begin deploying those on Starship in the second half of this year. But the big news here is SpaceX might be developing its own terrestrial network, meaning cell towers for the inside and dense urban areas. That's because at the end of the day, we're dealing with physics here. So these satellites are always going to be very high up in the air, much further away than a typical cell tower would be. So when you're inside with your cell phone, with walls and ceilings, no matter how good that technology gets or the spectrum you're operating in, it's always going to be subpar relative to terrestrial networks. And back to the SpaceX S1, in January 2024, we began deploying our Starlink mobile constellation that uses separate Starlink satellites with satellite to mobile capabilities, substantially reducing mobile dead zones around the world. As of March 31st this year, our dedicated satellite to mobile constellation of about 650 V1 mobile satellites provides satellite to mobile data, over-the-top voice and messaging services to about 7.4 million monthly unique devices across about 30 countries. And we've seen the posts like this from Elon where he says Starlink direct to your unmodified phone with no new hardware required. But to date, Starlink has been doing that in partnership with cellular carriers. And now, if this reporting is accurate, SpaceX will be looking to vertically integrate. Elon also said Starlink satellite direct to phone version 2 constellation will be much better medium resolution video. And I'm just putting some breadcrumbs together right now, but we learned SpaceX is working with chip makers for Starlink cell service. So SpaceX is already in the process of working with cell phone carriers to get the proper hardware in the phones. So right now, the direct-to-cell service between Starlink and T-Mobile works because it uses T-Mobile's LTE, and current cell phones support that. But with this new EchoStar spectrum that SpaceX has purchased, that is likely going to require new modem hardware, which is exactly why SpaceX is partnering with chip companies to get these cell phone makers prepared. So the direct-to-cell service from Starlink right now in partnership with T-Mobile has really been about filling in the gaps, rural areas or places where there's really not great cell connection. But now the drumbeat is pointing towards Starlink wanting to do all of it, have the terrestrial cell towers, whether they acquire a company or build their own, which would be a massive multi-year multi-year undertaking, but to pair that everyday dense urban city inside type cellular connection with the remote plug in the gaps, have coverage anywhere where you can see the sky type connectivity. And listen, I understand why people are speculating that SpaceX would acquire T-Mobile. It would just expedite the process of SpaceX owning those terrestrial cell towers and the customer acquisitions, etc. However, that could be in the neighborhood of a $300 billion acquisition, which I really don't think is likely. Part of the reason is there's plenty of legacy hardware and infrastructure likely at T-Mobile. So I think long term it would make more sense for SpaceX to pursue this hybrid approach where it continues to build out this satellite-based direct-to-cell communication and over time selectively chooses terrestrial locations to start building out that part of the service. They can choose the most dense locations with the highest economic ROI and build out from there wherever it makes the most sense with the latest and greatest from a hardware perspective. But if that's the approach, there's really no way around it. That's a multi-year, multi-billion dollar path. And that doesn't even touch on SpaceX trying to acquire T-Mobile. That would be a big regulatory hurdle, not to mention if SpaceX is also planning to acquire Tesla at some point. And back to the S1, we announced a definitive agreement with EchoStar to buy its AWS-4 and H-Block spectrum licenses. And then they laid it out for us plain as day. Even if the transaction is completed, there can be no assurance that our purchase of licenses from EchoStar will be sufficient to meet our growing need for spectrum licenses, and we may be unable to find other parties to provide us with additional spectrum licenses on terms acceptable to us or at all. In the future, we might pursue additional licenses in order to support the expansion of our connectivity services. And it's important to point out that these spectrums from EchoStar are for direct-to-cell mobile service. These spectrums are not primarily for broadband internet. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but naturally right now you have big accounts saying that, well, Elon is now going for the phone after all, implying that SpaceX is going to develop a cell phone. And I'll say, I think long term there is a world where they come out with some type of hardware device, not necessarily a cell phone, but something just with embedded AI. But that aside, this news today about SpaceX maybe building out its own terrestrial network has nothing to do with SpaceX building a phone. If anything here, SpaceX would just be building out the cellular network, not the device. And I'll say, SpaceX disrupting the likes of Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile is not an easy thing, but the good news is cellular is a very mature, stable, and high-margin business. And I can't tell you how many people over the past few weeks that I've interacted with in public that find out what I do question the entire SpaceX story. But even outside of the data centers in space and the terafab that most people do not understand, SpaceX very clearly has big ambitions here when it comes to being a connectivity and communications behemoth. So we'll dive more into it if and when we get more concrete information, but this could absolutely be a needle-moving news item. Also today, Elon has received regulatory approval from the FTC to acquire Mesh Optical Technologies, a startup founded by former SpaceX engineers. Mesh develops optical transceivers that use light to transmit data between data centers, offering improved power efficiency and lower latency compared to existing solutions. Mesh's founders previously worked on laser link communication for SpaceX's Starlink satellite internet system. Directly from their website, our goal is to advance the state-of-the-art in optical manufacturing, closing a critical supply chain gap in hyperscale computing, and building the next generation of optical hardware on Earth and in space. As far as I can tell right now, no financial terms have yet been disclosed. So to be very clear, yes, Mesh Optical likely has plans for inter-satellite communication in space in time. However, right now, today, the primary product is data center interconnects on Earth, moving data between servers and racks in terrestrial data centers using light instead of copper. So short term, this acquisition could actually have a lot more to do with Colossus and maybe even Cortex with downstream effects for certain learnings and technology to make data centers on Earth even more efficient and economical. And over time, it sounds like the hope is that that technology would translate to satellite communication in space as well. I'm seeing some people mistakenly say this technology is to communicate between data centers like Colossus 1 and Colossus 2, but no, that's not what we're talking about here. It is intra data center, meaning once again, between the servers and the racks under one roof. And right now that's largely done via copper, but Mesh Optical would be moving that to be done with light. And the main benefits moving away from copper here would be better efficiency, better power consumption, and less latency. And of course, this is a big deal for SpaceX's supply chain, as roughly 60% of optical transceiver manufacturing takes place in, you guessed it, China. But I think even more importantly, these optical interconnects are actually becoming one of the limiting factors for these massive GPU clusters. And with plans for orbital data centers and space-based AI, mesh networks will amplify those shortages. And yes, it would insulate SpaceX from certain things like export controls and tariffs, supply disruptions, and really any reliance on Chinese-dominated assembly. And a fun fact, Mesh says they were motivated by getting ahead of national security risks in the AI optical supply chain. But we should all know by now, Elon is all about the vertical integration, favoring in-house, tightly controlled production for any key technology. Following up again with the Starfall demo flight, we had Magnus capture some photos saying the Starfall demo capsule was successfully recovered off the coast of California following its launch from Florida. The recovery vessel Shannon brought the capsule into the port of Long Beach, where it was unloaded and trucked away for post-flight inspections. Unfortunately, SpaceX had the actual Starfall capsule heavily covered. They're being very secretive, even though it's been announced. But I wanted to close the loop. The recovery was successful. Today, Sawyer said the FTSE Russell will be adding SpaceX stock to its Russell US indices after today's close of trading, which is a perfect time, I think, to go over all of this lockup period that I'm seeing so many people butcher online. And frankly, this is one of the most important mechanisms to understand when it comes to investing in SpaceX over the next 12 months. So I put together a PDF to try to explain it as simply as possible. So I have 4 slides here. I won't go over every single detail, but go ahead and screenshot each one if you want to read the detail on your own. But a key distinction, Elon owns about 6.4 billion shares, which is about 49% of all of the shares, so that's his economic ownership. But because of the dual class share structure, meaning all Class A shares get 1 vote and all Class B shares, which are mostly all Elon's, get 10 votes per share, Elon actually owns around 84% of the voting control of SpaceX. But the easiest way by far to think of this, just break down all of the shares into 3 different buckets. Number 1, we have the current public float, the shares that are available trading on the market today. Those are all Class A shares sold in the IPO. We'll call it 639 million shares, roughly 5% of the overall SpaceX shares. Bucket 2, we have the 180-day early release block. These are employees and early investors that are going to have their shares unlock with a staggered cadence over the rest of this year. The size of this bucket 2 is about 4.6 billion shares, or about 35% of all SpaceX shares. And all of this bucket 2 is going to be fully released, meaning freely trading on the market as of December 8th this year. That's 180 days from the IPO. And finally, the third bucket is the over 1 year group. We'll call this the extended block, and there's 2 different portions here. Most people I've seen talking about this only have this as Elon shares, again, that 6.4 billion shares of his, but there's also a separate 1.76 billion share block here. So combining those 2 in this third bucket is about 7.8 billion shares total, or the remaining 60% of the company. And this final third bucket is to be fully released, meaning fully tradable on the open market sometime around Q2 next year. Now the second slide, this table A, this is only showing that bucket number 2, the 180-day early release block. So again, I'm not going to go line by line here, but screenshot if you want it. This just shows each tranche and the calendar date for when that block of shares is set to be released. And it's pretty straightforward. It'll show you the percentage of this block of shares. Again, this table completely leaves out bucket 1 and bucket 3. So this is the number of shares that will be freely tradable, and on the date, It'll tell you the percent of the overall company shares, the cumulative percentage of the block, and the cumulative percentage of the company. So again, right now after IPO, we have about 5% of the company shares trading, and the next unlock is going to be in August of this year, shortly after the Q2 earnings, where a large 20% of this block will be unlocked, which is almost 7% of the company, which will take the cumulative percentage of SpaceX shares of the company that are trading freely up to 11.8%. And if you guys want me to go into the weeds in a future video, I'd be happy to explain this conditional block. It just has to do with the SpaceX share price on the days leading up to the Q2 earnings. If it's above a certain price, an additional 10% will unlock then. If it's below a certain price, which is about $175, then that 10% of shares wouldn't unlock until day 180. But you can see the two big releases of this block of shares will be in August this year, and then the next big one would be November of this year. The first one after Q2 earnings and the second one after Q3 earnings. And one thing I want to put out there, I understand why plenty of people are saying SpaceX stock is going to crash throughout the next few months as these unlocks happen and these shares become freely tradable. And yes, there will absolutely be some downward selling pressure. However, number one, just because these employees and insiders can sell their shares doesn't mean they're going to sell all of them. These are SpaceX employees we're talking about, and I'd imagine they have high conviction in the company. They know what's coming around the corner. And yes, many of them will want to sell at least a portion to lock in some level of security and take advantage of the valuations. But ultimately, I'm just saying we don't know who's going to want to sell what. And secondarily, as you can see on slide 4 here, there will be buying pressure over the next few months as SpaceX is continually added for trading on different indices, some of which has already happened. As Sawyer said, the Russell will happen later today. And in the weeks ahead, we have indices like the MSCI World and the NASDAQ 100. And don't forget, the biggest one of all, the S&P 500, did not give SpaceX any early entry eligibility. So all of the passive buying for that index won't happen until next year. But that could actually work out because that could help to soak up some of the exit liquidity for when Elon's shares unlock. And this is the final slide, table B, which is showing only that bucket 3 for Elon shares and that separate portion for other employees and insiders. So it's the exact same situation. It's pretty straightforward. It'll show you the percentage of this extended block only. So this portion in the green is that other portion, and then the red row is all Elon. But primarily, I just want you all to have the calendar dates for when these shares are set to unlock. And Elon's portion, roughly 49% of all shares, he has no early release. So 100% of his shares are set to unlock on June 12th next year, 1 year after the IPO. And then the float curve will just show you the percent of all company shares that are tradable and at what date. Right now, we're still at around 5%. As of August this year, that'll jump to 15% and go up from there at each of these milestones. Meaning 100% of SpaceX shares will be freely trading by August next year. And by the end of this year, around 40% of all SpaceX shares will be freely trading. So I hope that's valuable for you. I have seen so many people talk about Elon shares in that bucket 3 and completely leave out the separate group of about 1.7 billion shares of other employees. So those are very important dates to understand, which will contribute to some level of selling pressure. But again, to some degree, it'll be offset by the buying pressure from index inclusion. So let me know if you have questions. Happy to talk about this more in depth in a future episode. To explain that Tesla Semi video doing some slip traction control testing in Alaska, Dan Priestley said, let's talk vehicle dynamics control. With high resolution sensing and precise multi-motor controls developed in-house, the Tesla Semi provides torque and stability even on the trickiest of winter surfaces. And he did say it's hard to see in the video, but the trailer is loaded. A concrete block over the fifth wheel and solid steel bars bars on the rest of the trailer. He said low center of gravity load for this kind of testing. And the Tesla Semi account listed the incentive programs for the Semi just in California. The HVIP program we've talked about numerous times gives you $120,000 off each Semi for up to 20 trucks. And the California Clean Fuel Rewards gives you an additional $120,000 off each Semi, no max truck purchase limit, and no scrapping required. Stacking allowed with HVIP for small fleets only, available starting today. So yes, that's a potential $240,000 off the purchase price. We're confident the TCO, total cost of ownership, will be superior without incentives like this, but with them, it's not even a conversation. With all of the chatter about memory and Micron and the major shortages and Apple price hikes, I just want to remind everybody that Elon did clarify the Terafab will be looking to produce over a terawatt of compute every year, including logic, memory, and packaging. I saw some people out there asking if the Terafab would cover memory. The answer is yes. So yes, once again, Elon saw the bottleneck months ago and decided the Terafab was essential long before other people knew there was a problem. We've been saying it's going to take longer for the cracks and the real crumbling to start happening at Legacy Auto, but here's an early sign. VW is weighing cutting up to 100,000 jobs and closing 4 plants. VW is considering shutting 4 German factories. To be clear though, they're just weighing it. It sounds like it's not a done deal. In absolute terms, laying off 100,000 people and axing 4 assembly plants would be the largest restructuring in automotive industry history. They're saying the aim is to fundamentally restructure the 89-year-old company, including spinning off the core VW brand and parts operations into separate entities. And they said the high costs are merely a symptom, not the cause. They do not address the root cause, which is weak sales. Sadly, we had to know headlines like this were coming, but we have clueless senators like Blumenthal now demanding Tesla be held accountable for the alleged self-driving crash. It's just like, these people are leading our country and they can't be bothered to do a little bit of fact-checking to understand what's going on here. It's all just narrative warfare. And honestly, sometimes I just can't believe the world we're living in and the info wars and how many people put out terrible misinformation, disinformation, or just outright lies. But unfortunately, that's just the world we're living in, and we each have to do what we can to fight for the truth. And separately today, Tesla did settle a lawsuit that involved a crash back in 2023 that was using FSD. This one happened in Arizona. There was an accident. A lady got out of her vehicle to try to help direct traffic, and Tesla on FSD was coming around a corner. There was some serious sun glare at the time, and sadly, the car did not stop and hit the lady, and she died on the scene. So we don't know the settlement details, but I wanted to share because this investigation was upgraded to an engineering analysis and is actually still open, so it has not yet been closed. And Tesla's own SGO reporting did have FSD active as part of this incident. So of course, the FSD of 2023 is not the FSD of today, but please just remain vigilant. And it's kind of a shame that things like this don't even register for us anymore as Tesla investors, but as Sawyer said, analysts are expecting Tesla to deliver 406,000 vehicles for Q2 and to deploy 13.8 gigawatt hours of energy storage. Tesla stock closed the day at $379.71, up 1.22%, and SpaceX closed the day at $153.23, up 0.15%, all while the Nasdaq was down 1.09% on the day. Hope you all have a safe and enjoyable weekend, and a huge thank you to all of my Patreon supporters.